All right, we're here with the Rooted in Jesus people, going to talk about takeaways that we had from the Rooted in Jesus conference in Atlanta. So we're going to get started with Kristen. Kristen, would you share some of your overall learnings that you're bringing back from the conference?
So I was really quite pleased with the quality of all of the presentations that I went to. And I felt like every single one had something that was a nugget that I could take away from and about. And I focused mostly on the communication tracks and evangelism. So those were the kind of my overall takeaways from the experience. It was a good conference. I thought it was worth it. Kathy?
I thought the conference was very good. My only complaint is that they offered too many items at the same time and trying to figure out which one to go to. And I fell into one by mistake, and I just stayed there for one session. But my overall learning from this is how important change is, and how, in order to keep up with our churches and our communities and our society, that we have to be willing to make change. Elaine?
Yeah, I enjoyed the conference. I kind of agree a bit with Kathy that it was overwhelming in the amount. So I've been going to the Forma conference for many years, and so this conference was different in that it had all these partners and so much to look at that sometimes I found myself kind of spinning in circles before I made decisions. But I do agree too that the quality of the presentations was very good, and I went there with a plan. I went in the formation track. I found myself changing my mind daily, but that I did do what I set out to do, which I focused on elements of my actual job and what I needed to know. So I worked in confirmation, and I worked in group facilitation and things that help me do what I do better, hopefully. But then also found myself gravitating towards the leadership track some, which I didn't intend to do in the beginning, but that I felt that some of the speakers and the presenters in that track were different and unique to what I've seen before. So that was good. I just fully enjoyed having that kind of fellowship, and I also honestly enjoyed watching everybody and have a great time and to benefit from the conference itself. That was really, because last year when I arrived in Spokane, I was the only one that went to the Forma conference, and then to turn around and have 17 people go this year was just awesome. Julie?
I thought it was a wonderful conference. I found all of the speakers and workshops and lecturers to be very well prepared, very knowledgeable on their topic. I had the evangelism track and dipped into discipleship some. I think some of my biggest takeaways were in evangelism, that evangelism is listening. That was a big talk, that evangelism listening, and that we need to hear other people's stories in order to invite them in. We need to know where they are and who they are, which I thought was great. I enjoyed hearing some of the stories of people's experiences in their church and the projects that they formed, like the Purple Church. Bill and I were in one lecture about this gal in Minnesota, I think, or something. And it's just fascinating what they've done to create an element of community and involving the community in church, and all of them being a part of, which was really neat. Personally, I felt, for me, my thought was, what's my ministry? What's my ministry? What's my ministry? And what I really realized was my ministry is to, they had that one workshop called Evangelism for Shy People, and it wasn't for people, because I thought, I don't need to go to that. But it was actually for, about Episcopals being so quiet about our faith and not sharing it. So I came home with some tangible things I wanted to do with my family, share about my faith that I had never shared. And it's been I've been married and with my wife for 17 years. And I decided I'm always going to wear a cross. So if anyone looks, it may start a conversation. So my ministry is going to start at home and working in the baptismal covenant with my children and really going through that over and over and helping them understand their commitment. So, Bill?
Am I supposed to talk now?
Yeah.
So, I'm just going to say one thing, the biggest thing that struck me, I preached about this past weekend, was after we were in the session with, and all fired up, listening to William Barber, and we had a chunk of time to go wander around to go eat dinner and freeze.
Yeah,
Not
in
Atlanta.
Atlanta.
Julie and Shana and I went for a walk around the Clark Atlanta campus, and we ran into this guy at the entrance to the MARTA station who accosted us, and he thought I was carrying a Bible, and he wanted to talk to us about Jesus. It was my notebook, but we all had our Rooted for Jesus stickers on. Anyway, we talked with him for a while, and I figured we have to have something to talk with him about. We were talking about evangelism all week, and he was there with his bottle of beer, but he'd been in prison for 24 years for murder.
Wow.
And so I'm still wrestling with what is good news for this guy. I mean, he was not buying God loves you and then walk away. And he did want money from us, but he wanted more than that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a real challenge to really wrestle with what could we give him apart from a few bucks to buy another bottle of beer.
Yeah.
And a tent.
Yeah. He did want to marry Julie.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
funny.
any woman that will give him money he wants to marry.
Oh man, sounds like an interesting conversation.
Who's invite next, Jan? Or did you already talk?
I just wanted to add, in terms of my overalls, how much of what I heard on the evangelism track, which I stayed with pretty much, was that we're not here to save the church. And I was really impressed with the things that talked about the loneliness crisis in the country, and that we simply just need to invite people to talk about the harvest is plentiful. We've got not just people who don't have faith, people who don't have friends, people who don't have any place that cares about them, that knows about them. As one person said, how bad does it have to get before we invite people? How many suicides do you have to have in your area from people who feel so isolated and alone before we figure out that we could actually invite people into some kind of fellowship and let the faith thing grow with them, but demonstrate that we love them and we want to get to know them and include them. So the urgency of that, it's kind of like, the harvest is right on our doorstep, like Lazarus dying out there. And we're all sitting around trying to figure out what would we do?
Yeah.
I have some pages on that I need to process.
Yeah, well, please share them when you process them. I'm excited to know more about your processing.
And Andrea, I guess you're the last one standing.
Yeah, and I shared at the last Zoom, but I'll just share really quickly. There were two themes that really kind of struck me from the conference. One was mentorship. I kept hearing mentorship, and I kind of cherry picked sessions. Like Elaine, I kind of went to ones that I thought were applicable to my job and what I'm doing, but my job is really broad, and so I tried to kind of go to a variety of ones, and I kept hearing mentorship come up in a lot of different contexts, like the need for mentorship, the power of mentorship. So that I really came away considering that. And then the other thing that I really heard a lot about was the need for more nurture and support of lay people, of lay ministers, of lay leaders. Like, how do we acknowledge lay leadership, how do we celebrate it? How do we make sure that this is upheld as a calling in our church, not just as like, you didn't quite make the cut for this, elite group of people who can talk about God. So I really heard that theme like in a lot of different places. And granted, these are things that have been on my mind as well. So it's quite possible that I heard them because I've been thinking about them. But however, how our brains are amazing things. So those were the things that I heard. So let's go around the group again and talk about takeaways from specific sessions that you want to share about. And we'll get started with Kristen.
Okay. I wrote about 4 different sessions that I thought were interesting, and I'm trying to find my stuff. So the first one, and especially as it relates to our Gathering Day stuff that we're working on, one of the things that we're doing at Gathering Day is really about helping our leadership learn how to tell stories. So one of the sessions was telling stories, telling our stories. Gave a lot of background information about what makes a good story and talked about the different options of how you present your story and what you might be doing with your stories. The thinking about inviting conversation and deep listening, investigative kinds of questions to get the deeper parts of a story out. And creating something that's shareable, so that if you're putting it either in a print text, it can be shared; in a social media setting, it can be shared, wherever you have it. So it's something that people want to share because I think it's an interesting story. But I thought it was really funny about what makes a good story being the characters. Who are the characters in the story? The setting of the story. Where is the story taking place? The plot. What's happening? What's going on in that story? What's the conflict? Every good story always has a conflict. What's the conflict that's happening? And how is that resolved? And then where was God in that place? So that was one that I went there, and that I think that we could use in our next Gathering Day with some of the storytelling sessions that we're working on. The next one that I went to that I thought was really good was about the communications audit and planning, about a systematic way of setting up a look at how are you communicating in your parish? What methods and methodologies are you working on? There were some great questions that I thought that could really help develop messaging for churches. This could potentially be, a whole session that we do at Gathering Day if we wanted to focus in on communication in a way to help train our parishes for how they might want to think about their messaging and who their target audiences are and who they want to be doing out there. But the questions I thought that were really great, was like, what does our church do well? What are people excited about? Where is the Holy Spirit at work? What would surprise people? And what brings you to the church that you go to? And what about your church dispels a common media myth or misperception or narrative about Christianity? What about your church dispels that common sort of thought process that people have about religion or church, if you will? Mm-hmm. And I think that can uncover some really exciting things about our parishes trying to learn more about who they are and what they are and how they're doing things. Then the next one that I wrote about and talked about was equipping your congregation to practice evangelism. And this was put on by Alyssa Newton, who is the College of Congregational Development person for the Diocese of Olympia. And she took the whole faith, let me see if I can find it. I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong page. The faith development in community model, and broke it down in a way that talks about how you can create pathways for people at the different levels, the 4 different levels of who's associated with your church. So what ways can you create a pathway for the vicariously connected to know and learn more about your church and perhaps step into being an occasional visitor? And then what can you do from an occasional visitor and drive them into becoming a Sunday sacramentalist, if you will? And how can you then move those people into a mature practitioner? It was an incredibly well thought out and put together presentation, and I've asked for a copy of it so that the RD team can take a look at it as a potential tool time presentation for one of our gathering day sessions. Then the last one that I talked about was a technique for how we can share our stories and speak about God, and it's a specific practice that that's off of the story sharing group that's a part of the larger church, and it had a specific. And again, I'll bring this up when we are meeting in February. An exercise that we can do that helps people understand how their stories are heard and be able to hear their stories being told back to them again. I was pretty excited about that, but I wanted to just mention that. So I think those were the 4 sessions that really spoke very tactically to me, which is what I always like to think about in terms of how do we go about doing some of these things that we're trying to do as an RD team. So those are my takeaways. Kathy?
Well, I attended, I'll report also on 4 sessions, just briefly. I attended music resources for small churches. And in that presentation, it was a panel discussion led by a gentleman, and I've got his name written down, but I don't have it right here with me. And they were talking about God inspires new musicians to write new music, and how we can take advantage of that at times. He also talked about, or the panel did, about hymns using inclusive language. And the references for that were Enriching Our Music 1 and 2, and Voices Found, and something about the Hymn Society of US and Canada. And I have not looked any of these up, but I'm looking forward to it since I have am now the vicar of a small church that has some music problems. And we need to, and music problems and few voices who can sing, including my own. Talked about when teaching new music that repetition works well. And you know that just from all experiences, that the more you go over something, the better it is. And to do things for repetition, like have hymn sings with offer food, during it, and have people have fun. That it could be the focus of a Lenten and Advent study to have new music practiced and make that part of the studies. And also, somebody had the idea of replacing the doxology with one hymn for a month, and that way people would learn it. We talked about recorded music and how you can go to YouTube and search for music or a hymn if you're looking for it to listen to get the idea. We talked about recorded music again with, I don't know if this was a book or what, but it's called New Wine and Old Skins by Carl Daw. And since I wrote down Hope Publishing, I'm assuming it's a book. Church Publishing has a list of canticles and hymns for morning prayer. And part of the things that they talked about was how the organist or pianist get ahead or behind the congregation singing. So to encourage the organist to sing along to keep the proper pace, and to use that old thing I used when I was a kid, a metronome, to keep pace. And there's also another publication called All Things Necessary by Marty Rideout. And I have not looked that up either. I plan on looking all of these up when I have a little more time. And then like Julie, I attended the Evangelism for Shy People. And that was not my choice, and I didn't mean to even go there. I just got to the wrong ballroom. And because it sounded so good, I just sat down and enjoyed every bit of it. And I've thought about this a lot, about how scripture about water is so soothing to people. And he emphasized that. And everything in the Trinity is called into community. And so we need to take advantage of that and recognize the need for change once again. Keep in touch with what the gospel is for you and listen for ultimate concerns. How is the Holy Spirit speaking to you and to others? Talk with others and ask if they, and there's no point in asking if they have a church home unless they seem really interested, or why. He said, don't ever ask anybody why you're not going to church. God doesn't worry about those things. He would rather have you share your faith with those to whom you're already connected, and to be very gentle about introducing our faith to others. And we had some exercises where we talked with our neighbor and went through some questions. Those were very comforting, I thought. I went to a panel discussion led by Dwight Shiley on implementing change and the changes that are needed. Vestries, unfortunately, they said, have not changed in a way that creates belonging. And they were suggesting that for churches that have more than one service, to make sure that individuals are on the vestry or bishop's committee from both services or 3 services, whatever. They also suggested that if there are churches that are bilingual, to have someone that speaks that language to also be on the committees. And they talked about exhausted congregations. For those congregations, we need to create a spirit of discernment. And then we need to have things like a neighborhood barbecue where we're getting used working with our communities, inviting a neighboring church to visit with us, and then to visit a neighboring church, and to use dwelling in the Word more than we probably do. Then they talked about security fears and how growth is really a problem for people. It's very mysterious to some, especially with neighborhoods changing and people moving in that are not the usual neighbors that we've had for maybe many years. To focus on discipleship and to encourage prayer life. People sometimes go to church, but they don't really have a prayer life. Listen to the neighborhood that your church is in, and encourage young people from the neighborhood to become leaders. Get them in by whatever means, and then encourage them to be leaders. And even the young people in our churches, they're coming up. We want to keep them there, and many of them have great leadership skills. We talked about the declining numbers of churches, and which is a trend. I mean, it is a real thing. And so they said, we need to step outside of our churches and find out what is needed out there. Walk around the neighborhood and listen to the people's stories. Be clear on what we are doing so that we can share that with others. And to remind people that some things must die in order for new things to grow. Some sacred cows have to be let go so that we can start new projects and ideas. Consistency in leadership is good, but we still need to introduce people to leadership, and foster that. And to take ownership of mistakes if we make mistakes. Admit them. If a program doesn't work after we've tried it, and stop it. Don't beat it to death. And for the lay people in the session, they said, might take your rector to work with you one day. Just like you take your daughter to work or your son to work, or take your rector to work and introduce them around, which I thought was kind of a very innovative thing to do.
That's really fun.
Yeah, I think that would be cool.
Yeah.
And I went to one seminar, since I am now kind of responsible for campus ministry at St. Paul's. And it was on how to love your college students. And it was two individuals presented. They had written a book called Belovedness that will be out June 17th. It's by Church Publishing. It was an excellent, I thought one of the best ones that I attended. And they talked about the challenges facing college students and about the care and feeding of our college students. You know, we need to help them out. And they said for those that can't go home for holidays, and there are many, to invite them to your home for a meal, send care packages during Dead Week and Finals Week. And I had a lot of notes on them, and I have somehow misplaced them. So I can't share those with you right now. But I'm anxious to get the book on Belovedness when it is out and see what that contains. Elaine.
Okay. My process is not as formed as the rest of you, so I followed one conference with another conference, but I can say that in the formation track, I focused on some of the projects we currently have going. So we have a confirmation initiative in the region here in Spokane. So I did 2 workshops related to that, actually 3 if you include the mentorship workshop. So in confirmation, the first one I found was informative, but didn't really bring me any information that I wasn't already aware of, except for there was a point at which she followed the history of confirmation in the Episcopal Church and how it has changed to where we are now. That is, if you go across churches and even diocese and beyond, that it is very different in every place, which in some ways can be helpful in terms of customizing it to a congregation, but also can be difficult in that what is it that we are trying to accomplish when we bring youth in particular together in confirmation. So then she went through all the resources available, and there are many. But the thing that was most striking is that though we look to curriculum to set the tone many times in confirmation, and it is very important, but that there are other things equally or possibly more important, being the relationships that are formed. So there's big emphasis on mentorship in confirmation now, and ways in which we can grow relationship within a congregation or whatever the community is that you're gathering around those that are seeking to be confirmed. So that was also, that went to a collaborative, a panel discussion, same people, and this is all based around some research being done across denomination in a project called the Confirmation Project. So the people that were speaking, and there were a number of them, are all in that project, and were sharing their results of their research. And the research goes across several, I think there's 4 different denominations involved, and it is a national initiative. So you come out of it with a pretty good slice of things that were common no matter where you are and no matter what denomination you're in. And so the 2 things that were most important were relationship, and then a sense of worth for those in terms of youth, bringing and lifting up the youth in the process of confirmation, not so much just teaching them. That and then when you get into the mentorship piece, that's as important in imparting knowledge and passing information as it is when you're sitting in the classroom. If you do have a classroom component, which most everyone did, to share that which we pass on from generation to generation, that are the pillars of our church. So that was in a nutshell confirmation. I mentioned mentorship. I went to a workshop centered on mentorship, which was done in a really unique way. And the presenter was a layperson and an architect by trade. So she used mentorship in a master-student experience, which is what her tradition and her occupation did in the beginning. And she held up Frank Lloyd Wright as a person that you could look to, and how he took and mentored people in an apprenticeship fashion. And so what does that look like if we do that type of mentoring in the church? And how is knowledge passed on from one generation to the other? And so this is more of a contemporary professional model, but it was how it applies. And so now we've moved to a little bit different way and think of what mentoring is, and how is that changing the way in which we do ministry. So it's still usually a one-on-one shared experience, but it might also be related to a ministry or a group of people in terms of teaching skills and sort of fostering the growth of an individual in ministry. And it was also, then we broke down into groups and we talked about mentorship, positive and negative. So it was really brought to light that though we always seem to think about mentorship as a positive experience, that people have had actual mentors that were negatively impacting in their lives. And what does that look like? And all back to say that those relationships, negative, positive, or anywhere in between, make a mark on us, not only in the church, but in life. So those all three kind of together were valuable. I would say that from there, I had surprises. I went to a workshop that was a journeying workshop for youth, and it was focused on doing racial reconciliation as pilgrimage. And that was fascinating to me. And I don't have the notes on that, but I will tell you that it was done in a way that the relationships were cultivated over a year process before even stepping off. Then the person that had designed and run the pilgrimage was able to share all the pitfalls that you get into when you take a youth group out. And having just done that to Ireland, I could share and say yes to many things that she was talking about, but that the overall experience has the outward experience that you have with the group, and then the inner journey that you have as each individual. So all that to say, I just want to do one of those now. I'm very excited about thinking about what it means. And I asked some questions being here in Washington and not seeing a very diverse population around me. I hear often that we don't deal with that day to day, and so that's not something we need to worry so much about. And that statement very much troubled me, or has troubled me.
Yeah.
And so I brought that up in the workshop. I said, we as an Episcopal church, we're pretty white, right? So what do we have to do with this topic, and how are we deeply rooted to this topic? And everybody in the room agreed that it's even more compelling and more important in our setting, because our youth may or may not have day-to-day need or experience. And so they feel sometimes somewhat removed, possibly. But we are still called to have, to be deep into this question as Christians. And so how do you do that? Well, it might be that we need to travel to do that. Or it might be that we look at our current situation where we are, and it looks different than working in reconciliation with African Americans. We have Indigenous people all around us, and how do we begin that conversation? So I'm very excited about that too, and we're forming a mission weekend not too far in the future to begin that process. And we did a little bit of it last year on the diocesan level, so we're going to go back at it on the regional level. And then I hope that it just continues to grow, and that we do go on pilgrimage in a bigger way. I kind of saved the one that had most impact on me for the last, and it wasn't really a surprise to me, but the very first workshop that I attended was called "Turning a Broken World Upside Down: Spiritual Practices for Leading Disciples." And I think I liked most the way they actually approached formation in the workshop. So the goals for the workshop talked about identifying your ministry and context and how you might benefit from turning what it is now upside down so that you are more fruitful to channel God's grace. And then it went into very specific ways, and we actually practiced ways in which to read and interpret applied texts in a way in which scripture becomes the central focus of your ability to look at brokenness. And then what does that mean when you are intentionally going into it to make change happen and to turn things upside down? So we just went through a repetitive process where it took each point and it spoke to that point. And at the end of it, we imagined what our life might be like spiritually different from when we walked in as we took it home. So it had that turning out piece of, how might I change my own spiritual practice on a regular basis and make that upside down, that real change happen. So, and I have the PowerPoint to that, so I can hopefully share that in some way. I also have all the information for the pilgrimage and all the information for the confirmation project, which is something we're using already. And so I was excited to actually meet the people that are doing that work. That's it. Julie?
Man, you're so detailed for not having any notes or whatever.
Well,
no. So my notes are in my iPad, and I have my little iPhone. But I did go through my schedule of what I did, and can recap some of those things. The whole day on evangelism was Evangelism Matters, and it was from like 9 a.m. until 6. I mean, it was all day long. And it started out with the what is evangelism, and finding out so many misinterpretations, my own being as well. It's not scream it from the mountaintops, this is the way, come here and I'll show you. That they talked about it being a listening skill, and I think one of the most impactful parts of this was it's not about, someone mentioned it, filling the pews in your church and creating a bigger congregation, but really touching people individually and meeting them where they are and having conversations, because we all have a brokenness to us and we need to share it, and then we can bring God into it. So that's pretty powerful. They had a lot of great, I found a lot of great programs where they used small videos where they told stories. And so during the day, as we worked on evangelism and as it transitioned into something else, it became a storytelling day. And at first they had all of the presenters tell short stories. And I think one of the most impactful ones for me was one guy goes out and they said, become part of your community. If it's your coffee shop you go to every day, engage with those people and have the relationship with those people. And in doing that, an opportunity arises where they're either talking to you or you're talking to them, and God comes into the story. And some of the stories were pretty powerful. They were where it was clear that God was part of that conversation, and it was transformative for the individual, whether they came to church or not, or your church. They just had that experience in their heart. So that was really, really interesting. Then later in the day, we had to tell stories. Said they'd tell us one, they'd give us the little sample, like, can you give me a situation where God has shown himself in your life? And we had to sit around with the small groups of 3 and each one tell a little short story about something like that. And what was really interesting is I found how difficult it was for some people to really let the guard down and say any of that. It's very difficult for some people, because one of the people said, I can't believe you said that out loud, to me. Yeah, that was funny. But in telling the story, feeling how it has power in it, and communicate. And what I really, really loved about it more than anything is that's what we're doing in Baptized for Life. We're practicing having that one question and then answering how God was a part of that question in our small groups, and going to share on Saturdays before church. I think we have something planned where we're each going to get up and tell our story, and so that everyone starts sharing stories. So this was just a great workshop to tie into Baptized for Life. I mean, it was really, really quite wonderful. Then we had the whole day where it was on Wednesday, the whole Michael Curry Day, and Bishop Barber, and then we had the revival, and our opportunity to try to evangelize on the streets of Atlanta, where we found ourselves in an unsavory area, but still felt very comfortable in, kind of walking in Christ and, feeling okay about it. So a lot of the Wednesday was that. Then I went into the Civic Engagement, which was really interesting. It was about racial, exploring politically how we can be so diverse and how we can tie that together. And we were both in that workshop, Devin Anderson. And she talked about, that her church is half Republican, half Democrat, and how they just went out into the community and started provide platforms as a church where it was such a neutral area that everyone felt comfortable doing it. And one of them being, they had a sheriff's race, and the same sheriff had been sheriff for 30 years, 28 years. And what they found out is he had an ICE location there where he put people in his jail, for ICE and stuff like that. And so they had this other gal who'd never run for office, but just thought it was so wrong. She was going to run as sheriff. And what was really interesting is, out of all the people in the town, nobody could bring these two together for a debate or anything, except when the Episcopal Church came in and said, we would like to be a part of this, and we would like to be hosts to this. And only then, when there was a very neutral element that was brought in, were they able to have that debate and the community all come together, which I thought was really cool. Then we did do some racial, so the whole day was things of, one of them I was in was called putting the feet on the Jesus movement, and how the movement's becoming, and what's the intersection of formation, evangelism, and racial reconciliation. And really how the church needs to change our approach and change our way in the way we look at our community and how we interact with them. Some of it, I didn't feel ashamed or anything. I just felt like it was very eye-opening, and there are changes that we do need to make to reach out to everyone. Then it talked about learning the practice of evangelism as a spiritual practice. And I think that's where I really got the idea of, I need to,
That's David's book.
Yeah. David was almost in a lot of my sessions, where it talked about, what are you doing? How are you personally doing things? And what really made me realize, I have my part where I've kept it very sacred and almost secret, but really safe, because of my history in churches, my relationship with God, but it's time to start sharing that so I can, grow personally and help others. So it was just wonderful. I know I don't have it. I'll send you my notes. I think one of the big things too is I came back to Spokane. I said, okay, so what can we do with this storytelling part, what we're doing at church, and how can we help people at church understand that it's not something scary to do? And last night there was an event called Pivot Spokane that we all need to go to. They do it once a month. The guy from, the guy on the Northern Quest commercials, the funny guy who's joking about himself. He and his wife are always on these commercials. Do you guys get Northern Quest? All right. Anyway, he's the guy who started this program, and they have a different topic once a month. And you have to go in there, and it's storytelling. And last night it was Hooked. And they had 4 speakers before intermission, and then 3 speakers after intermission. And anyone can be a speaker, which is really interesting. The criteria is, let's see, hold on just a sec. The criteria being, we were talking about this. There's 3 rules. It has to be true, has to be autobiographical, and you can't read it. So I think it might be an opportunity not only for us to practice, but to also share whatever the topic is. You write in and tell them that you want to talk. An opportunity for us to really experience storytelling, and it was phenomenal. And people had really heartbreaking stories. They're very clever and brought in a lot of humor in it. Katie Burke is in Leadership Spokane with her in 2015, and she said her hardest part is not being in. She's had so much kickback being a part of city council, but because she's in city council, she's been able to do a lot of community work because of her position there. And the gal who was the teacher of the year who was there, Mandy McMahon, who was teacher of the year that Trump presented the award to and stuff, who's very pro-gay and all this stuff, and was one of the speakers. But anyway, you just have a 10-minute story. And I think it might be a really good way for us to go in and either view, or someone even go up there and have an opportunity to tell their story of God or whatever, Anyway, so I will send you my notes. They're more detailed than that. And sorry I didn't have them, but I brought the wrong tool. So, Bill?
I shared really all my thoughts last week, so I don't have anything to add, and you have that on recording, so.
Yep, I do.
I will cede my time to anyone else who wants to finish up.
Jan, did you have any thoughts that you didn't share in the last Zoom that you wanted to add?
Well, about a couple of bold moves that came out in some of the workshops. One of them on children in church. If you don't have Sunday school and things like that, or even if you do, new family comes in, engaging the children as part of the worship. Have them carry a banner, have them carry the cross, have them help take up the collection, get them out of the pew and into the service. And not just the kids, but think about how you're using the rest of the congregation as well. One of the things I have always seen work well in slightly alternative services is no rota. You just collar the people who show up and say, would you read the lesson? Would you read the prayers? Da, 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 da. And people feel this is our service. We participate. We help put it on. But they don't have to make those ghastly commitments that, 4 weeks from now I will be there, when life isn't like that for them. You can use that to engage children in a way where they really feel important and included, and then they'll want to bring their parents to church because they're having a real sense of meaning. I was engaged with the idea of finding the sacred in the ordinary, of sacramental eyes, as part of our storytelling, of learning how to see the sacred in life's events. And I have a lectio from a monk from New Camaldoli in Big Sur, called Lectio for Life, that I've used from time to time, and I'm going to bring it out again because he's set up a whole process for doing that, for how to find it from a churchy point of view with like the God word, or how to say the gathered community, where is the face of the sacred rather than God, if you don't quite know what finding the face of God would be like. So that connected with me. So some ways of looking at church experience in terms of invitation. it's all well and good to be shy people, but at one of the workshops I was at, they said, stop saying, well, if you would feel comfortable, would you like to come, and just boldly invite, have a sense of confidence in what you're doing. And asking people afterwards, instead of saying, did you like it or whatever, just saying, what did you notice? We can do that with all, not just with newcomers, but with all kinds of people. What did you notice about that? As a way of having a conversation leading into perhaps into change without getting the polarity of what I liked or what I disliked that can get people all bound up in craziness. So I've got a whole notebook full of goodies that talk about your cup runneth over. Yeah, I'm still not sure I have my brain back from trying to keep up for 4 days of cram, especially as a raving introvert. It was into the ears by Friday.
Well, if you can find a way to share some of those things with us, Jan, that would be great. That was a fantastic question, and I loved the things that you just shared. It actually reminded me, I visited St. Andrew's here in Spokane, and they did this really cool thing where the prayers of the people, like each segment of it, like where the leader would say something and then the congregation would respond, was cut up into those portions and left at the back of the sanctuary. And as people came in, they picked up a section if they wanted to read it. And so literally during the prayers of the people, like you would have one person back over here who would read the first segment and then the congregation would respond. And then some person over here would read the next portion and everyone would respond. And it was a really beautiful way of doing prayers of the people. It actually felt like we were praying together in this way that, I don't always, sometimes with a good leader, like you get that sense, but it really kind of pulled us all in together. I enjoyed that.
Stop. We've turned our congregation into an audience rather than participating in worship.
Yeah. Man, this was an exciting conversation, and I wish that we had a ton of time to keep asking questions and learning more about all the things we learned. But thank you so much to all of you for taking this time to share some of your learnings. And again, thank you so much for taking the time and the energy and the money and all the resources that you did to go to Atlanta and to go to Rooted in Jesus. I think it was a very fruitful time, and I'm super excited about all the things that you learned and the energy that I sense from each of you.
Yeah, I'm hoping that people will do what I'm going to do, and that is write up your notes larger than this, so they can be emailed around, or they can go to Andrea, or somehow everything you would want to say about what you learned is available to all of us. Because it's so rich, and I hear things and I think, God, I wish I'd gone to that workshop, but I was at this one and it was fabulous and all.
Yes.
We've all learned so much that beyond sharing with this, it's like, tell me more.
Yes, exactly. Yes, so on that note, do send me your notes, and I'll kind of pull them all together and then send them out to everyone, and we'll work to make sure that we continue the conversation together. All right, friends.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very
Have a
much.
great afternoon.
Bye, guys.
Okay.